Hey, my name's Nath, and I'm the solo developer behind Headwear Games. I'm currently working on my tech noir survival horror game Hollowbody, which is maybe why you're here watching this video. Previously, I've released two other commercial games. I worked on Chasing Static, which was a psychological horror walking simulator that was based in Wales, and previously, or prior to that, I worked on Guard Duty, which was a point-and-click adventure game, sort of a fantasy sci-fi mix in the vein of like Monkey Island and Sam & Max, games like that. So I just wanted to talk to you about, stuff to do with Hollowbody today, really. Sort of some of my influences behind it, a little bit about the story, about how it's developed. I'll start off with just sort of describing a little bit of the background to the game. So you play as Mika, who is a black market delivery driver. She works for a team of sort of underground, slightly unsavoury characters who ship illegal goods around the city she's from, Aonis. The premise of the game is that her friend, her partner, Sasha, joined a group of researchers who were looking into the sort of mysterious circumstances that happened with this city, this British city that was abandoned and shelled by an orbital strike. So she travels to the city illegally with this group of researchers to try and find evidence, try and find something to prove what happened. None of them come back. Obviously, Mika is, just not too happy about this. It takes Mika a while to be able to get clearance to get into the city. She knows a few people, a few dodgy people who might be able to get her clearance to go past this exclusion zone to get into the city. And when she does, about 2 weeks have passed since her partner went missing. Mika ventures into the city. Her hovercar is hit by an electrical storm. She's grounded, crashes into the ground, and then wakes surrounded by the urban decay of this abandoned city. And that's kind of the premise. So you spend the game primarily trying to find a way out of the city. It's surrounded by these massive walls that were erected after the collapse of the city, and she needs to find a way out, and she needs to find her partner if she's still alive. So that's the general premise of the game. I call it a tech noir survival horror mainly because I didn't really want to call it cyberpunk, because cyberpunk's kind of taken on a different meaning over the last sort of 10 to 15 years. It's a lot more about sort of neon and augmentations and cyber warfare. And whereas Hollowbody's more sort of in the vein of stuff like Terminator or Alien or Escape from New York. And the term tech noir is actually, it was coined or associated with James Cameron when he made Terminator, because there's a bar in the film called Tech Noir. And since then, it's kind of, it makes for a good way to describe those sort of 70s, 80s, early 90s sort of sci-fi films where they're all a bit more grounded. And they didn't necessarily have these huge budgets, or, well, they're fairly big budgets, but like they didn't have the access to like modern CGI techniques to fill everything with loads of 3D CGI. So they were sort of a lot more reserved in their depictions of sci-fi. A lot of the technology is sort of CRT based, big chunky buttons, still looks futuristic, and that's the kind of vibe that I was going for with Hollowbody. So the game is a survival horror game in the vein of classic survival horror titles, games like Silent Hill and Kuon and Rule of Rose. Survival horror has had a bit of a renaissance over the past 5 years. There's been a lot of really awesome modern AAA survival horror games that have come out. We've had the Alone in the Dark remake. We've had Alan Wake 2, which was fantastic. Stuff like the Resident Evil 4 remake, which is probably a bit more action horror than survival horror. But Hollowbody is very much a classic survival horror game. It takes shamelessly takes influence from Silent Hill and a lot of these early 2000s PS2 survival horror games. So that means has fixed camera angles, has sort of functional but a bit janky combat, has loads of emphasis on narrative and puzzle solving and exploration. And I figured, like, the whole visual style of the game is kind of trying my best as far as I could achieve to replicate that kind of visual that you would see in those games. And I thought today we could do a little bit of a show and tell of some of my influences. So first up, we've got Haunting Ground. This is a really cool game. It's set in Wales in like a gothic castle, it's a big manor house. I think it's set in Wales. I hope I'm not wrong about that. And you play as a character who is, for the majority of the game, running away from monsters and solving puzzles. There's no combat per se. There's ways to like slow down the chasers, but in general, I suppose it's not an emphasis on combat, okay? It's more about sort of the narrative and also the like fear of, all of these chases in the game are super overpowering, overwhelming, and you don't really have many means to deal with them. I like this game because the art in it is fantastic. It was sort of one of the later PS2 titles. So the art is really, really well developed, and they also sort of learnt a lot from the games that came before it, in that stuff like the way the in-game cameras are handled. There's a lot of wide shots. The environments are quite spacious, so there's a lot of room to move about. They try and keep when they use fixed camera angles, they try and keep them all from the same perspective. Like they take into consideration the 180 rule, as it's called in film. So the camera cuts aren't too jarring. The controls are really smooth, and yeah, generally a great game. Next one, Project Zero, or Fatal Frame, as you may know it if you're from the US. This series is really cool. I particularly like... This isn't my favourite in the series, but I particularly like this game because it's good to sort of, as a design point of view, it's a good study piece. It has a lot of claustrophobic, really tight interiors, and it does a lot of asset reuse, which is, from a design point of view, is where you use the same 3D assets in multiple places and different ways to try and create environments without having to, produce hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of 3D assets. I think it's very economic in its use of assets. I think it has a really consistent style throughout, and it handles claustrophobic interiors very well, which a lot of survival horror games don't. So it's quite a lot to learn from this game. You have a spirit camera, so a lot of the horror comes from sort of looking through a camera lens in first person and things jumping out. But yeah, good game. Good game. Next one. Oh, it's Silent Hill 3. The GOAT, the greatest of all time. This game's amazing. You don't need me to tell you that. You play as Heather, who is a sort of late teen, I think. I think that's the vibe. And the reason why I like this, I love Silent Hill 2, and I love it just as much as I love Silent Hill 3, but I love them both for different reasons. In fact, yeah, Silent Hill 2, Silent Hill 3, I'll talk to you about these at the same time. The reason why I love Silent Hill 3 is because you play as a protagonist who isn't depressed, who isn't sad, and who is actually a nice person. Silent Hill 2 is like a really dark, depressing story. It sort of handles a lot of themes that are very mature. Silent Hill 3 too also handles mature themes. But this is quite sad, and this is a little bit less sad, if that makes any sense. Heather is a really awesome protagonist. Mika in Hollowbody, my game, is inspired by her quite a lot. She always has something to say about like the environments, and it's normally quite witty, and it's very characterized. It's sort of, all the lines of dialogue feel very much the sort of thing like a teenager would say. And all of the supporting cast are really well done, really well handled, really well developed. It's also quite a linear game compared to Silent Hill 2. There is an open section towards the end of the game where you get to explore Silent Hill a little bit, but mostly it's kind of linear in the sense that like the environments have branching paths, but they mostly go the same direction. And there's a really cool sort of block of, it's not an apartment block, it's kind of like an industrial estate block with like a dance studio and various other businesses set up in it. And that section is probably my favourite section of the game. So Silent Hill 3. I'd pick up Silent Hill 2 because this has a very good apartment block in it, which is, I was directly inspired by in Hollowbody when I created Gator House. So you might be able to pick up on that. And also, art-wise, pretty heavily inspired by Silent Hill 2 as well. You don't need me to tell you this game is good. Everyone knows this game is good, excuse me. But yeah, great one. What else we got? Oh, this is, Extermination. You may not have heard of this. I don't think it was like... It was definitely a popular game. I mean, they sold loads of copies, but not that many people talk about it. It was one of the games that was released after Resident Evil 4 came out, and you may or may not know, Resident Evil 4 had a massive impact on survival horror. It kind of changed the genetic makeup of how a survival horror game was developed from that point onwards because it was so popular. This game kind of copied that. But I really like it because it has a really awesome final boss that is great fun. And it's, I mean, I played it when I was a kid, so there's some nostalgic value here, but it's a fun game. It also has a lot of like gross sort of fleshy mass growths and bio-organic stuff to it, sci-fi bits, which Hollowbody also has. So yeah, save that. Do with that what you will. Next one. Resident Evil Code Veronica. This game's really cool, and a lot of people, it's underrated, I think. I think more people should respect this game. It has some problematic content in it when viewed through a modern lens, or even a lens when it came out, to be honest. It really doesn't handle the subject matter very well. There's a cross-dressing antagonist that is kind of not handled great, but if that aside, it's a really cool game. You got to think, when I played this, my experience with survival horror or Resident Evil was Resident Evil Nemesis and Resident Evil 2 and Resident Evil 1, all pre-rendered backgrounds, PS1 games, and I was a huge Resident Evil fan at the time. And then to have a chance to play a 3D one that, let's be honest, the in-game graphics looks like what the pre-renders did on Resi 2. So it was awesome at the time. I still think it's awesome. I replayed it last year and really, really liked it. It has a couple of dead ends in it if you don't know ahead of time, which is just baffling how they got through the QA phase on that game. But it's a good game. Check it out. All right, I've ran out of my pile. What should we talk about next? I know. Let's look at some more footage and talk about my stuff behind it. All right, 2 secs. Okay, so I figured it would be quite fun to talk you through some of the gameplay footage of the demo of Hollowbody. So, in case you don't know, the demo is available on Steam right now. I say that. This is during NextFest currently that it's being recorded. I might put this on my YouTube later, so there's a chance that the demo might not still be there. Hey, the game might be out. You could go and buy the game right now. But yeah, if you haven't bought it or whatever, or if it's not out yet, please wishlist it. That'd be great. But yeah, I figured I'd talk through some of the gameplay footage. So the demo starts with Mika crash landing in this abandoned British city, as we've mentioned before. The electrical storm hits her hover. Despite being warned by her in-flight assistant Beeb that she should probably try and find somewhere safe to land, she ignores him, and hover gets wiped out of the air. She crashes into the ground. So my thinking behind, I've mentioned a little bit of this before, but like the reason why I wanted to set it in a British city is because I feel that horror, when it's something familiar, it kind of hits home. No pun intended, hits home a little bit differently than when it's like a lot of sci-fi horror. It's like on a spaceship, like loads of sci-fi walls and doors, computers, whatever. And it's not necessarily like that relatable. But I also wanted to tell a story that was set slightly into the future. It builds off some stuff that I tackled in Chasing Static, so it may be in the same universe, maybe not. But yeah, it's like near future. It's set in like 2060 something. I haven't really nailed down the date yet, even though it's referenced in the game. It's around there, so it's kind of near future. So in the city, a lot of the buildings are based on buildings that are similar to what I grew up around. So I grew up near the city of Swindon in the UK. I currently live in the city of Bristol. So you'll see a lot of these kind of traditional British terrace houses, apartment blocks, and all of the like signage, the roads, the high streets, the way the shops and the streets are laid out. It's all very familiar, which I think kind of helps, with the horror. It's something familiar and quite grounded. But because this city was sort of abandoned, it was forced into poverty, it was abandoned by the state, things started to deteriorate. They didn't make any new houses, so all the bricks and mortar in Hollowbody are all very familiar houses, but the tech, which has been retrofitted after the fact, is all quite fairly futuristic. It's this tech noir again, kind of retro futurism. So stuff like the houses require digilock house keys, like digital keys. All the apartment blocks are key based. Their telephones are video phones that are quite similar to the ones in Blade Runner. They're like TVs, are big, bulky, sort of sci-fi CRT things, and even stuff like they have ambience devices in the apartment rooms, which are just some world building stuff I've made up, but it's like a device to set the ambience of your room that they used to have. So there's a lot of hints towards the kind of sci-fi stuff, but it's like, the buildings and stuff are familiar. That was something I really wanted to kind of establish from the start with the game. So I've got the footage playing over here just so I can talk about it. You see quite a lot throughout the game, even the demo from early on in the game. There's this weird growth everywhere. There's this stuff growing, and it kind of seems to be trying to reach for something. At least that's what Mika thinks. And it all seems to be coming from somewhere underground. We're not sure what that is. I know, obviously, but I can't tell you because that would spoil the game. You have to play the game to find out. But it's cool. It's like a contrast to all of the really sort of sterile, angular brickwork and concrete, and then there's this sort of organic, sort of, curved, fleshy stuff everywhere. And that stuff gets pretty cool later on in the game. Yeah, you'll notice when you sort of walk past corpses in the game that a little heads-up display appears on the side that shows all of the details of the person that died. The sort of thinking behind that, or the narrative reasoning, is that every citizen is legally has to be fitted with a citizen ID chip in their body. And the government or the state at the time kept a record of every single citizen, what their job was, their date of birth, their name, and stuff like that. So you get that readout whenever you find a corpse in the game, which adds a little bit extra world building. And hopefully helps kind of make you feel for the poor people that were left abandoned in this city after it was evacuated, or the rich people were evacuated anyway. So yeah, as you're exploring like the apartment block that you'll get to explore a bit in the demo, one thing I really wanted to do was kind of try to tell the stories of the people that lived there through exploration, through you like walking into a room and seeing like how the room was set out. Maybe there's a smaller child's bedroom off to the side, or there's some photos on the wall of like the people who live there, and it sort of starts to tell a story of what happened. There's various collectible notes throughout the game, from stuff as boring as like a utility bill that shows that the resident's bill went up by tenfold over the last 6 months, which, more world building, or they might be like their last notes that they've written just before they died or something. And collectible notes are a pretty common thing in horror games, but I like to use them. Like I sort of intend to have them from the very first stage of design. Like they're not just something there to collect to get a number and get an achievement for. I don't really care about achievements. They're there to help further reinforce this world building. Yeah, so stuff like that. There's also, which you kind of experience in two places in the demo, there are these flashbacks which are triggered by Mika's radio. So in certain areas of the game, you'll get a little prompt in the corner saying there's a Kotak signal. Kotak is her device for communicating with people. It's the one she used to try and contact Tax. But yeah, when you use it in these specific locations, it shows a brief flashback, audio, voices of the dead, so to speak, and it gives you further context to the lives of the people that lived there and what happened. I got a really, really cool voice cast in the game. I couldn't be happier with the voice actors in the game. They're all great, and it really adds something, I think, to the overall feeling of this world being one that's been lived in. Yeah, so as far as like the control style is, I've tried my hardest. Obviously I'm a survival horror fan. I tried really hard to kind of study as many survival horror games as I can. I'm like an artist first and a coder fifth. I mean, obviously I do everything. I'm a solo developer, so I do absolutely everything on this game, including the soundtrack. But I'm not like an amazing coder, so there was a lot of learning that I had to do whilst making this to try and replicate these systems that have been seen in old PS2 games. I kind of naively thought that this will be fairly simple because the combat's quite janky and simple in those games, and the cameras are, fixed cameras. But it's a lot more complicated than you'd think. There's like code to account for when you switch between cameras to make sure that your input doesn't automatically reverse and you flip over to the other side. Just trying to get the cameras bound within rooms so they don't clip through walls but still have a bit of movement and dampening to the aim. Making sure you get the shots that you want to kind of focus on the things that the player needs to interact with or see, but without making it really awkward for combat, because as soon as you introduce combat, it's fun not being able to see what's off screen and being able to hear it when you haven't encountered that enemy yet. But when you're like running for your life from a bunch of enemies and you can't see where they are because the camera's looking at this point of interest, it can be a bit frustrating. So probably one of the biggest hurdles with this game has been just getting the camera system to like functional level to be playable and not be too frustrating. I appreciate that a lot of people who probably haven't played the classic survival horror games might find it a bit of a bit of resistance there, but I promise once you sort of get into the systems and get used to how the camera works and kind of get a feel for it, I'm sure you'll enjoy it. I've also, as I had to really, I've added tank controls into the options, but the game is designed first and foremost to be played with a controller and without tank controls, because I didn't want to put an extra step of resistance to new players. Tank controls can be quite super confusing to get used to if you've not used them before, whereas Hollowbody is camera relative, which means whichever way the camera's pointing, if you point the stick in that direction, she'll go that direction. So yeah, the camera system was super hard. Combat was, although like I said before, I kind of figured the combat in these games is quite simple, so it should be easy to code. Combat's also been really hard to get set up. I'm pretty happy with where it is now. People seem to enjoy it. There's a nice variety of weapons. The game really isn't about the combat, so don't expect this to be about sort of speed. You can speed run the game, that's fine, but don't expect it to be like a challenge mode where I just keep spawning enemies. The combat isn't really good enough to support that kind of gameplay. It's like a complement to the narrative and the exploration and the story. It's something there to add a bit of peril and a bit of fear and something to avoid and to spice things up between puzzles and story. So, talking about puzzles, I thought it'd be fun to go through a few of my influences again regarding puzzles. If you're familiar with any of my games, there's probably the one common thread between all of my games is that they all involve some kind of puzzles throughout them. I'm a really big fan of adventure games. They're kind of my bread and butter. I was brought up on adventure games. When I first started developing video games in my early teens, I was really, really into the idea of making an adventure game. When I say adventure game, I mean sort of a classic point-and-click style adventure game, like my favourite were the LucasArts classics, but obviously Sierra and various other companies also made them. And that was really how I sort of learned game design and game development. There's this program AGS, or Adventure Game Studio, it's an open source program for making point and click adventure games. It's been going for years. I made my first commercial game in it. And that's kind of how I cut my teeth on game design and indie game development when I was younger. So talking about which, what have we got? We got some more goodies. Guard Duty. This is my first commercial release. This is a PC box version we got done, but it was also released on PS4, Xbox, PC, and it was one of the last ever PlayStation Vita games to get a physical run, which is really cool. I actually don't have it to hand at the moment, but it's like really nice limited edition physical on PlayStation Vita of all things, which is pretty cool. Puzzles, I love puzzles in games. I think my love for survival horror comes from the fact that they are just adventure games with a darker tone and a little bit of combat, a bit more sort of, obviously a 3D, a bit more exploration. But, classics like Silent Hill, Fear Effect, like these games in particular have like really good puzzles, and they're games that I played when I was younger, so were a big inspiration on things. But also, my love of puzzles comes from originally Myst. And this is actually the original copy of Myst that I had when I was very little. It's a Apple Mac version. Has it got anything on here that says about it? Surely it says the system on it. Here we go. Oh, this is an IBM one. That's weird. Okay, at some point it switched over. I played this first on Mac. Obviously Myst was very big on the Mac when it came out. It was the biggest game ever released when Myst released. It took the world by storm. It's a really cool game. It's got a very weird vibe and atmosphere, almost creepy in its own way. And the puzzles are really, really hard. Don't make much sense, but it's probably the first puzzle game I ever played. One of my favourite adventure games of all time, Discworld. I love Terry Pratchett's work, and this is another game that I grew up on. This is a PC version, but I first played it on the PS1, and then later on the PC. I love everything about this game, especially the soundtrack. It has some weird, it has some nonsensical puzzles in it. It kind of gets a bad rep for the puzzles being a bit dumb and not making much sense, but that's half the fun, really. I mean, I had to use a guide when I was a kid to finish it. I actually got nightmares about one section in it because I got so stuck on it and it was so in my head. But that's a great thing about games, eh? I've got loads of these. Look, Beneath Steel Sky, that's another big influence. If you haven't played this game, I highly recommend it. The art's by the same guy who did The Watchmen. He did all the background art in this and the cutscene art. Fantastic game. It's quite short. It's a really good adventure game. This box is a bit old and biffed up, but I recommend that. And then we've got Monkey Island. Got Monkey Island 2. Monkey Island 1's down there as well. I won't bother grabbing it. You know Monkey Island. It's a classic LucasArts puzzle adventure game. It's very good. And Indiana Jones and the Fate of Atlantis is another one of my all-time favourite adventure games. Probably from maybe number one. This is kind of... It's either this or Broken Sword 1 or Discworld, I'm not sure. I've got Broken Sword up on my shelf, but it's a PS1 copy. So I had a Mac. This is a Mac version. So this is my original copy of Fate of Atlantis from when I was a kid. So I had a Mac, and then very shortly afterwards I got a PS1, and because I played adventure games like Myst and this on the Mac, when I got the PS1 I also was really into adventure games. So that kind of gives you a bit of background, right? I like to think I've made, this is my third game with puzzles, right? Third commercial game with puzzles. It's probably like my sixth released game with puzzles, because I released a bunch of free adventure games before. And I've learned a few things, I would like to think, over the years. So I'm hoping that the puzzles aren't as confusing and illogical as the ones in like something like Discworld. I tried to ground them in reality. If you go and play the demo on Steam, you get to sort of play through one of the first big main puzzles. And the way I try to approach the design of that is, to cut the long story short, it's you need to find out a safe combination, right? And I won't give away the solution, but traditionally in not modern games, traditionally in like survival horror games even, if there's a number combination you need to work out, there's normally like an answer somewhere. You'll find it on a note. It will say, "Oh, my birthday was 1952," and then that's the password. Or sometimes they'll add like a little extra step in the process. But the way I like to design puzzles is to start with that, and then try to split that. So try to split up the solution between multiple like hints, essentially. So to solve the safe puzzle, you have to not only find 3 separate parts of information, but then there's a little bit of logical thinking, a little bit of like deduction from yourself to kind of work out and get that safe code from those hints. And that's the way that I've approached all of the puzzles in Hollowbody. I've tried to make sure they're all grounded in the environment. I spoke earlier about how important environmental storytelling is to me. And I think something that I couldn't really get away with in Hollowbody was puzzles similar to stuff like Silent Hill, for example, or Resident Evil. They often have sort of these weird, strange mechanisms to unlock a door or to lower a podium that reveals some steps into an underground passage. Yeah, and it's normally like you have to put in 3 separate like plates into slots to unlock it, or you have to go and get the crow key, or the part of a statue you put on the statue arm, and the arm kind of lowers down and release mechanism happens. That sort of stuff is a bit too immersion breaking for what I was going for in Hollowbody. So I tried to make sure that all the puzzles are kind of logical within the rules of the world. There's one of the first things you're hit with in the apartment block is the ground floor gate that allows you access to the ground floor, and ultimately the second stairwell so you can get to the roof, which is like your end goal for that section of the game. Someone's filled it with like some builder's expanding foam, so the keyhole is absolutely rammed full of this stuff. And in order to get rid of that, you need to find something corrosive that can melt away the expanding foam, which reveals the keyhole. And as I mentioned earlier about puzzles having sort of separate layers to them, you'll then need to also get the key, which is I won't spoil it, but it's kind of a red herring in Hollowbody. You think you've got the key, you think you've got it all sorted, and you realise that there's yet another extra step to the puzzle. And that's something I like to do throughout the game. I like to kind of split up the puzzles, pace them out a little bit. I think it makes them a bit more fun and a bit more interactive. So it's like a lengthy section on puzzles, right, with some show and tell. I'm trying to think of some other bits that's worth sort of addressing in the game. Obviously, the tone of the game is fairly dark. It's quite depressing, in a similar vein to how Silent Hill 2 is quite depressing, and most horror games are a bit sad, right? But I'd like to think that the underlying moral of the story is one of good intentions. And like one of the main things I really like to focus on in my games is atmosphere and vibe. So there's been an immense amount of work put into the sound design, for example. I've been really honoured with like the response I've had about the atmosphere and sound design of this game and Chasing Static before it. There's the one standout thing from Chasing Static that without fail was the most commented on thing was the atmosphere and the sound design. People really liked it, and that isn't necessarily something I went into that game feeling like confident about. I didn't know that was a skill that I was like good at or whatever. I did go to university to study film for a while, film and digital media. We did all sorts of bits, but it was a whole sort of year just learning about filmmaking. I suppose a bit of that comes into it, and I make guitars and stuff. I make a bit of music, but yeah, atmosphere is something that I'd just like to hyper focus on. One of the influences I often mention with Hollowbody is Ghost in the Shell, and I think that show in particular, and also with Ergo Proxy as well, they have like a vibe or an atmosphere. If you've seen them, you probably know what I mean. It's sort of, there's a little bit of melancholy there, there's a little bit of kind of film noir sensibilities, and it's sort of set on this like somewhat dystopian backdrop, and like I really like that. I really like it's I don't know if there's a word for it. It's kind of cozy, but in like a somewhat melancholic, depressing way. It's like there's comfort to be found in the I don't know, there's comfort to be found there somewhere in the kind of dark, oppressive vibes. So obviously I've done all the music myself for Hollowbody, which has really helped me with the atmosphere side of things, because I can kind of design an area with a mood in mind, and I'll do the art on the computer, like the 3D art, block it out in Unity, and then generally I screen record that and then take that into my digital audio workstation where I do my music, play the video, and then I can have all my synths and stuff, and I can kind of play over the top of the video, try out different things, see what fits the vibe. The game is raining for like essentially the whole game, which I think adds quite a nice contrast between the interiors and exteriors. So it's always wet and there's a lot of thunder and lightning outside, and dark, oppressive music. And then you go inside and you get that kind of feeling of, oh, I've come in from out the rain, like, you know, I'm sheltered, it's safe in here, but the rooms inside like won't have power, so it's really, really dark, or like there's, you know, shambling corpses and dead bodies and stuff. So all of it plays into atmosphere, really. That's at the foundation of everything I make, and I really hope that comes across in the game. Yeah, so atmosphere is obviously a big part of how I design the game. Another thing that I kind of took a leaf out of Silent Hill's books, or at least Silent Hill 2, is how environments are designed as far as like their layout and how the player navigates them. One thing that I've read when researching Silent Hill was that a lot of the locations, they've tried to base them on the layouts of real-world locations, which kind of reinforces that feeling of familiarity that I was talking about before. So many, like the streets, like the apartment block and the various like other locations that you visit in Hollowbody, they're all layout-wise, they're sort of designed to try and replicate something that logical, like something you would see in the real world. And that has sort of some challenges to it, because from a game design point of view, you know, that's not always the best choice for game design. The apartment block, for example, originally you could access every single room in the apartment block, and I soon found when people were testing it that they were just getting confused as to where they needed to go, because like it's realistic to be able to access all the rooms and to have them physically built out, but it's not fun if there's nothing in them. Like if you go in this room and you explore about, and there's just nothing unique in it, it's the same as the other apartment block, which is, you know, how they generally would be. They're all going to have a similar layout. So I ended up blocking off quite a lot of those rooms for game design purposes, but the apartment block lent itself quite well to making an interesting design for a location, because you've got sections where you finally get into this room, you have to get a key card to get into the room, you finally get into there and the floor's caved in where someone's dropped they've missiled the building and it's kind of collapsed in the roof. And once you get down into the bottom room, you're locked in the room, so you have to find your way out through the wall. And then when you get to the floor below, you realise that you're actually locked into that floor. And then there's a puzzle to get out of that floor, but before you can solve that puzzle and get out, you have to deal with some combat encounters. So you're kind of trapped in these enemies. And I think stuff like this, like, that's where you can kind of take a traditional layout of a location, like the layout, how the layout would be in the real world, and then you can kind of gate off bits, and you can slightly modify bits and sort of, hold the player's hand a little bit and lead them, to make that location fit in with something that's a bit more gamey, a bit more gamified, without it feeling, unnatural. And that's basically what I've tried to do throughout the whole of Hollowbody. You like all of the residential streets, they all have fairly logical layouts, but like I've tried to build them so you can kind of trace back on yourself. The high streets, there's a section where you go to the sort of city centre, town centre, and they're all very familiar high streets that look a lot like the ones where I live in Bristol. But I've tried to sort of gate them off so that where the player's got basically one or two routes to go, and they're quite linear sections, which are inspired by some of the way that Silent Hill 3 handles its progression. And so fingers crossed all the locations feel familiar and spooky, and reinforce that feeling of dread, as I mentioned before. From like a design point of view in regards to sort of building the narrative and the characters, obviously the game has voice acting. Originally, when I designed the game, I intended for Mika's character, who's played by Kirsten Rea, who's fantastic, by the way. I think it's her first video game role as a voice actor, which is amazing because she absolutely nailed it. But originally I planned for all of the lines spoken by Mika to be voiced. So like when you inspect something, she says, "Oh, that bed's gross, I don't want to sleep in that," or "Oh, these drawers are empty, there's nothing interesting in there." I was going to have all of those lines voiced, but the thing is that when you're actually playing through it, and this is probably, I suspect, the reason why something like Silent Hill, just checking my recording's still going, we're good. It's the reason why something like Silent Hill didn't do it is it's those lines, when you read them as text without hearing a voice, it feels like it's the character's thoughts. You're sort of reading the text and it's relaying their thoughts, what they're thinking about it. As soon as you add a voice line, especially in a horror game, it's so weird. It's like they're speaking out loud to themselves, and you've got like this background atmosphere that's like really oppressive, and like slight little creaking pipes and stuff in the apartment, and then the character just goes, "Oh, that's gross, I'd never sleep in that," and it takes you out of it completely. It's really weird, and it's kind of a shame because like I wanted to have as much of her voice acting as possible because it's really good, but we decided quite early on to just leave all of those sort of generic interactions silent, so you read them and they feel like you're listening or reading Mika's thoughts, and then whenever she comments on something that realistically she would say out loud, so like when she's talking to other characters in cutscenes, obviously that's all voiced, or when she's like, she'll sort of enters the apartment block, she's like, "Right, time to get to the roof," like she's kind of reassuring herself, something that logically she might say out loud. And like when she gasps or goes, "Oh, gross," when she sees something, that's all spoken. But yeah, I thought that was kind of an interesting discovery through design. I quite ambitiously wanted to voice everything, and then it turned out that it wasn't the way to go. But yeah, I'm really happy with the voice cast in the game. Got like a fantastic, diverse cast of British actors. Got loads of different regional accents. We've got like northern accents, southern accents, southwest. A lot of accents that sound like they're from Bristol around here. So the only thing it's missing is a Welsh accent. I had quite a few Welsh voice actors in Chasing Static because it was set in Wales, but yeah, I don't actually have any in Hollowbody, which is a shame. But yeah, I brought back some of the voice actors from Chasing Static as well. Actually, one in particular, Erica Sanderson, has voiced a character or multiple characters in every single one of my games now. She's great, and I'm really, really looking forward to people hearing her character in Hollowbody. You can hear a little bit in the demo when you answer the phone. That's her. She's the character on the other end of the phone. But yeah, no, it's really happy with the voice cast, and yeah, generally I've learned a lot for the design throughout of the game. I hope that comes across when you play the game. Yeah, I'm kind of running out of things to say now, so it's probably a good time to wrap this up. I will be in the comments section on the side here, or here, whichever side it is. Probably this side, right? On Steam, so if you have any questions, just drop them in the chat and I'm more than happy to reply to them. You can also email me at info@headwaregames.com. That's HEADWARE, like software, but for your head. And yeah, also, if you haven't already, please wishlist Hollowbody on Steam. If you're watching this on the Steam event, then it's like literally one click, you just click it. That will really help me out. Like I said before, I'm making this whole game myself. I'm a solo developer. Plan is to publish it myself as well. So every wishlist genuinely really helps with the Steam algorithm. If it has more wishlists, Steam show it to more people, then more people wishlist it, and everyone gets an email on launch telling them the game's out. And if all goes well, it sells decently enough for me to make another game and keep this business going. So yeah, thank you so much for watching my live stream. If you, like I say, if you have any questions, put them in the chat. If it's not on Steam anymore and you're watching on another thing like YouTube or something, there's probably a chat there. You can put your questions in, or yeah, like I say, just email me or DM me on Twitter at Headware Games. I'm just at Headware Games on all socials, so you can always find me there. All right, peace. Have a good one. Thank you.